Life has always felt like a series of hard knocks, interrupted by a few moments of light. Losing my parents early was a blow I never quite recovered from, a sting that lingered no matter how much time passed. But then, luck came in the form of the Parkers, the elderly couple next door. They took me in without hesitation, treating me more like a granddaughter than a charity case. We didn't have much money, but we were rich in love, and back then, that was all that mattered. Just as I was starting to find my footing, turning 18 and thinking about college, the Parkers were killed in a car accident. In the blink of an eye, I was on my own again. They left me a little money for school and their cozy suburban house, filled with memories too painful to bear. I sold it and used the proceeds to buy a small apartment in the city, near the college where I'd enrolled to study financial management. Having a plan felt good, like I was finally moving forward. College was tough but rewarding, and I threw myself into understanding numbers, markets, and the mechanics of money. After graduation, I landed a decent job. Days were busy, but nights in the bustling city felt inexplicably lonely, like a void no amount of noise could fill. That's when I met Tom. It was at a friend's party. He was loud, funny, and unapologetically himself, his energy as infectious as his laugh. Our first interaction was pure chaos. He bumped into me, spilling my drink. "Hey, watch it," I snapped, startled. "My bad. Let me make it up to you. What were you drinking?" he asked with a grin that dared me not to smile. "Just a beer," I said, trying to sound unimpressed. "2 beers, coming right up," he shouted over the music, heading to the makeshift bar. That was Tom, straightforward and endearingly clumsy. We talked all night about everything and nothing. By the end of the party, I wasn't ready to say goodbye. A year later, he proposed in the simplest, most Tom-like way possible, on the couch. While we were watching TV, he pulled a ring from his pocket, his hands shaking. "Marry me?" he asked, holding the ring so tightly I worried he might crush it. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so us. "Yes, you big goof." Marriage didn't change much at first. We were the same, just legally bound, and it felt right. Life in my small city apartment became cozier, with Tom by my side. For the first time in a long while, the evenings felt warm, not empty. Then came the curveballs. Tom's parents, the Dawsons, were wonderful people. They welcomed me with open arms, their warmth soothing the ache of my own losses. Weekends at their suburban home became a comforting ritual filled with barbecues and heartfelt conversations. But life has a way of shifting abruptly. Tom was called away for a year-long business trip, and shortly after he left, Mr. and Mrs. Dawson's health declined rapidly. Mrs. Dawson's worried voice broke through one day. "Grace, I hate to ask, but I really need your help." Without hesitation, I moved into their home, managing the cooking, cleaning, and anything else they needed. The apartment was rented out, and the income went straight to helping the Dawsons. The days were long, but family sticks together, that's what I told myself, even when the weight of responsibility grew overwhelming. Then Emily arrived. Mrs. Dawson's daughter from her first marriage swept into the house unannounced, bringing tension like a storm. Her presence was unsettling, her motives unclear. One evening, Mr. Dawson, frail and weak, called me to his bedside. "Grace," he rasped, "watch out for Emily. She's dangerous." His words sent a chill through me. I promised to be careful, though I didn't fully understand the warning. True to his concerns, Emily quickly began to assert herself, creating an atmosphere heavy with unease. One morning, as I prepared breakfast, she stood in the kitchen, her tone sharp and icy. "Just so we're clear," she began, a storm brewing behind her words. "I'm not here to play housemaid or chef for anyone," Emily declared sharply, sipping her coffee as she glared at me like I didn't belong in her mother's kitchen. Her words cut, but I kept my cool. "Okay, Emily, I've been managing things so far, and I can keep at it," I replied evenly, trying to maintain the fragile peace. "Good," she snapped, her eyes daring me to argue, "because I don't plan on lifting a finger. This is Mom's house, after all." From that day on, Emily's presence became an oppressive force. She ordered takeout for herself and her mother, leaving the empty boxes for me to clean up. Her disdain was blatant, but I swallowed the bitterness for the sake of Mr. and Mrs. Dawson, who needed calm amidst the chaos. "Grace, why don't you sit and eat with us tonight?" Mrs. Dawson asked one evening, her voice carrying a rare warmth. Before I could respond, Emily cut in, her tone dripping with false concern. "Mom, Grace has been busy all day. She probably prefers eating later." The message was clear, I wasn't welcome. As the days wore on, Emily's entitlement consumed the house. She whispered with her mother late at night, turning her against me with venomous words. Mrs. Dawson, once so kind and understanding, grew distant. Her gratitude faded, replaced by curt commands and cold stares. Then Mr. Dawson passed away. His funeral was a somber affair, with Harry flying in just in time to say goodbye. Having him by my side, even briefly, was a relief, but beneath the grief, I could feel the tension thickening at the Dawson home. "How's everything been while I've been gone?" Harry asked quietly during a moment alone. "Fine, everything's fine," I lied, forcing a smile. I didn't want to burden him. His grief was heavy enough. "You sure? You look worn out," he pressed, his concern evident. "It's just been busy, you know, helping out around here," I said, deflecting. It wasn't the time to unpack the storm brewing beneath the surface. As soon as Harry left, Emily dropped her act. The dutiful sister disappeared, replaced by the domineering presence I had grown accustomed to. Mrs. Dawson, perhaps consumed by her own grief, mirrored Emily's coldness. Conversations turned into commands, and I became an unwelcome guest in the home I had worked so hard to sustain. Emily's audacity knew no bounds. She barged into my room without knocking, rummaging through my belongings like a scavenger. One afternoon, while seeking solace in the garden, I stumbled upon a box hidden among the shrubs. Inside were my watches, jewelry, and even some underwear. Nearby, several of my dresses were draped carelessly over a bush. Anger surged through me as I gathered my things and stormed inside. Emily lounged in the living room, her smug expression daring me to confront her. "What the hell, Emily?" I demanded, my voice trembling with rage. "You can't just throw my stuff out." Emily laughed coldly. "Live here? Please, you're just a guest, and not a welcome one. You should be out in the garden or, better yet, on the street. You're nothing but a freeloading beggar anyway." Her words stung like a slap. Trembling, I turned to Mrs. Dawson, who had just entered the room. "Mrs. Dawson, please," I pleaded, my voice breaking. "Tell her she can't treat me like this. This is supposed to be my home too." But Mrs. Dawson's eyes were cold, her voice void of the warmth I once knew. "This is Emily's house now. She's right, Grace. Maybe it's time you found somewhere else to live." Her words struck like a hammer. The family I had fought to protect, the home I had worked to keep afloat, was slipping away. Despite everything, I stayed, bound by a promise I'd made to Mr. Dawson on his deathbed to look after his wife and not let Emily overtake her. But day by day, Mrs. Dawson adopted Emily's cruelty. "You're just sitting on your hands here, aren't you?" Mrs. Dawson snapped one evening as I cleaned up after dinner. "I'm doing my best to keep things running smoothly," I replied, my voice steady despite the hurt. "Best? Could have fooled me. You're just freeloading," she scoffed, walking away. The irony stung. I had rented out my apartment and sent nearly all the income to Mrs. Dawson, while Emily lived off her mother's pension without lifting a finger. "What does my brother even see in you?" Emily taunted one night, her voice loud enough to pierce through the walls. I bit my tongue, swallowing my anger and frustration. But everything changed one evening when I came home early from work. I paused in the hallway, hearing Emily and Mrs. Dawson deep in conversation. "We need to get her to sell that apartment," Emily said, her tone greedy. "You know how much money we could use." "Yes, but how do we convince her?" "Grace isn't a fool," Mrs. Dawson replied, frustration lacing her words. "Leave it to me, Mom. I'll sweet-talk her. Once she signs it over, we can finally live the way we deserve," Emily said, her voice dripping with malice. The betrayal hit me like a cold splash of water. They were plotting to strip me of my only financial security. My hands trembled as I packed my essentials, my heart pounding. I couldn't stay another moment. Without a word or a goodbye, I slipped out the back door, leaving behind the house that had become a battlefield, and a family I no longer recognized. I ordered a taxi to the station, gripping my bag tightly as if it were the only anchor in the storm raging inside me. Sitting on the train, doubts swirled in my mind like restless winds. Would Harry understand? Would he believe me or take their side? The uncertainty was crushing, but the fear of staying was even worse. I stared out the window, watching the landscape blur into an abstract painting of green and gray, a mix of fear and resolve settling in my chest. When I arrived at Harry's place, his reaction was a blend of shock, relief, and unspoken concern. His eyes widened as he opened the door, taking in the sight of me, frazzled, drained, and clutching my bag like a lifeline. "Grace, what are you doing here? Is everything okay?" he asked, stepping aside to let me in. I hesitated, the warmth and familiarity of his home tugging at my fragile composure. No, Harry, everything's not okay, not at all, I admitted, my voice breaking slightly. He guided me to the couch, his expression etched with worry. Talk to me, babe, what happened? Taking a deep breath, I spilled everything, from Emily's return to the house's toxic atmosphere, the financial manipulations, and the final straw, their plot to take my apartment. I hadn't wanted to burden him while he was away working, but now it all came pouring out. Harry's face darkened with every word, his jaw tightening in anger. By the time I finished, his fists were clenched, and his pacing betrayed his fury. Why didn't you tell me this sooner? He asked, his voice a mix of frustration and concern. I didn't want to cause more trouble. I thought I could handle it, I admitted, feeling foolish now. Grace, you shouldn't have to handle anything like that alone, he said, his voice rising. I can't believe my mom and Emily would treat you this way. He stopped and looked at me, his eyes intense. I'm not letting anyone treat my wife like that. No way. Pulling out his phone, he dialed his mother. The phone barely rang twice before she answered, but I couldn't hear her words. Harry's stiff shoulders told me enough. Mom, this has to stop. I know about everything, and I won't tolerate it. If Emily doesn't leave and you don't start treating Grace with respect, you can forget about us helping out anymore. No more money, no more anything, Harry said, his tone unyielding. There was a fiery exchange, but Harry's resolve didn't falter. Finally, he ended the call, turning to me, his expression softened. Looks like it's just us now, babe, but that's all we need, he said, pulling me into his arms. I leaned into him, the safety of his embrace fortifying me. Just us, I murmured, feeling the truth of his words. The next few days were a whirlwind of change. I arranged for remote work, and Harry helped me retrieve my belongings from storage. Together, we set up a modest home office in his living room corner. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours, and it was peaceful. Then, one afternoon, a call shattered that peace. It was Mrs. Dawson, her voice dripped with desperation. Grace, why haven't I received the money for this month? You know we depend on it, she demanded. I was stunned into silence for a moment, her audacity almost laughable. After everything, you really expect me to keep supporting you? I asked, incredulous. In the background, Emily's shrill voice echoed, laced with anger. She's just ungrateful, make her send it. I took a deep breath to calm my rising anger. Mrs. Dawson, Emily called me a ruthless beggar. I'm not sending money to people who treat me like trash. I'm done. There was a pause, and I could almost picture her stunned expression. But we're family, she said, her tone a mix of anger and pleading. Family doesn't treat each other the way you've treated me. Goodbye, Mrs. Dawson. I hung up, my hands trembling. Harry was by my side instantly, his support unwavering. You did the right thing, Grace. It's time they learned to stand on their own. Life moved forward. Not long after, I discovered I was pregnant. The news brought unexpected joy, filling our future with promise. We decided to sell my apartment and buy a small house in the suburbs, a place where our child could grow up. Just as we were settling into our new chapter, another call came. This time, Mrs. Dawson's voice was broken. Grace, I made a mistake. Emily forced me to sell the house and took the money. She left me with nothing. Could I come live with you and Harry? Her plea stirred pity, but the memory of her choices steeled my resolve. Mrs. Dawson, I forgave you long ago, but forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. You need to live with the consequences of your actions, just as I have. I ended the call and blocked her number, my heart heavy but resolute. Months later, as Harry and I marveled at our newborn daughter, Mia, the pain of the past began to fade. We built a life filled with love and laughter, each moment reinforcing that we had made the right choices. Against the world, together, we were stronger than ever.